I want to use the second part of all we're talking, really kind of understand the philosophy between Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and understand the difference. In order to lead up to that, and especially the 2017 fork, can you walk us a bit through the timeline on on the different philosophies there, the different ideas? And I know you're really good at completely objectively talking about what does one party say, what does the other party say, and distill the up and downsides out of it, and why you made your own decision. But can you kind of work this way up a bit on this entire block size debate? When did this all start, from what you can remember? And then also what's the role that Blockstream has in all that?
Yeah, yeah. I, I need to write an entire book on this subject because so much happened, but it kind of started brewing originally maybe in 2014-ish, I would guess. And one of the first major changes to Bitcoin that was really a big change was this thing called replace by fee. And so there's another Bitcoin core developer named Peter Todd, who was paid by a guy who claimed he worked for a 3-letter agency in the US, paid Peter Todd to make a video about why you need to keep the blocks small in Bitcoin, and then paid him to introduce this thing called replace by fee. And what replace by fee does is it allows someone on the Bitcoin network, if I were to send you Bitcoin and let's say I paid 10 cents in fees at that time, and you have to wait on average 10 minutes for a block to come, if the block hasn't come yet, I can then rebroadcast that transaction. Instead of paying 10 cents in fees, I can pay 11 cents or 12 cents or anything more than 10 cents and send that money, that Bitcoin, to a different address. So I can send it back to myself or send it to somebody else, or basically make the transaction reversible until it's been included in a block. And there was a pretty heated argument within Bitcoin at that point. And Eric Voorhees wrote a fantastic article basically saying, like, Peter Todd, I respect your brain and your intellect and your contributions to the space, but please understand, for the people that are trying to use this as money, this is damaging to Bitcoin being able to be usable as money. We don't want it to be able to have reversible transactions. We want the transactions to be done and over with as soon as they're broadcasted to the network. And replace by fee wound up going through and getting, made live on the network. And like,
why did it? What were their arguments?
Their
Or what was
arguments,
Peter's argument to push it through?
at the time, I think people didn't have a full understanding of what their future roadmap for Bitcoin was, but their goal was to have the blocks become full. And if the blocks became full and you didn't pay enough, and then other people paid, let's say you paid 10 cents for your transaction fee, and then a whole bunch of other people then paid 11 cents for their fees, and you're at the back of the line, well, but you want your transaction to be included in a block, you can then adjust your transaction from 10 cents to 12 cents, and then you're ahead of all the people that just paid 11 cents in fees. And so that was the reasoning for that, is so that when the blocks become full, you would be able to bounce your transactions to the front of the line. And to be fair, like, I don't remember them saying that explicitly at that time. And maybe I was too busy running bitcoinstore.com. That's what wound up being the justification as to why they needed that later. And maybe there was some other underlying reason at that time, but from a person that's trying to use Bitcoin as money, I don't see any reason to have that to this very day. And in fact, Bitcoin Cash doesn't have that. Bitcoin still does now.
Because it goes with the risk that people could do an actual double spend without it being an actual double spend.
It makes it easy as can be for anybody to do an actual double spend. And later on, it actually became even worse than that. So the average block time on both Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash is 10 minutes. But if the blocks are always full on Bitcoin, that means your transaction might not be included in the next block. So instead of just having a 10-minute window on average to reverse your transaction or do the equivalent of a chargeback on Bitcoin, at the end of 2017, the average confirmation time on the Bitcoin network was more than 2 weeks. So that meant on average, you had more than 2 weeks where you could do a chargeback of your Bitcoin transaction, which, I mean, that's worse than just about anything, right? I guess credit cards give you 30 days to do a chargeback, but a wire transfer, you won't be able to charge back after 2 weeks. Maybe you can do it after a day, but not much more than that. So that was a big problem there as well.
So that's how it all started, 2014. Yeah,
that was certainly a part of the start. But the big argument where things got really heated is what the future of Bitcoin should be. So there's this block reward. Every 10 minutes, the miners get some new Bitcoins. And so every 4 years, half of all the remaining Bitcoins get released to the miners. And so in about 120 years from now, that block reward is going to run out. And so one camp within Bitcoin was, okay, in 120 years from now, the mining reward is going to run out. So in order to solve that potential problem that might take place in 120 years from now, we need to make the fees high on Bitcoin today so that the miners are incentivized to keep mining Bitcoin. And the other side of the argument, the side that I came down on was, well, this is a problem maybe 120 years from now. So we shouldn't intentionally cause a bad user experience today with high fees and full blocks in an attempt to solve something that might be a problem 120 years from now. And so that just seemed like a stupid trade-off to me. And then another part of the argument here that that the two different camps had is the small block camp had the idea that the blocks need to stay small so that people can afford to run a full Bitcoin node on a cheap computer on a home internet connection. And that way Bitcoin is more difficult to shut down or more difficult to control or more difficult to turn off. And there's some truth to that argument, and lots of smart people subscribe to that argument. But I think the part of what they're not seeing is that if you allow the blocks to become bigger and it takes a more expensive computer to run a full node, or it takes a faster internet connection on a full node, but more people around the world are able to use Bitcoin because it has a good user experience with fast, cheap, reliable transactions, maybe you'll wind up having 1 billion people around the world using Bitcoin, and it'll be on a larger number, absolute number of computers around the world running full node because you have 1 billion people using it instead of a few million people using it. And so you'll have a lower percentage of people running a full node, but it's a higher number of absolute full nodes out there. And I think it's the total number of miners and full nodes out there that's important to giving Bitcoin its censorship resistance rather than the percentage of people running full nodes. And then my other argument that I still think was right is that we needed to get as much adoption in commerce and people around the world as fast as we possibly could, because governments move slowly and politicians write new laws very slowly. So if we can get as many people around the world using it, not to buy drugs on the Silk Road, but getting it to use, buy pet food and baby diapers and, whatever, old people diapers as well, and your dinner and your lunch and grocery shopping and anything and everything. If the entire world is using it for normal stuff, or at least if a lot of people are, it'll be too late for governments to demonize it. It'll be too late for them to make it illegal. It'll be too late for them to push back against it. So my goal was to get as much adoption in commerce and by as much adoption by as many people as we possibly could, as fast as we possibly could. Whereas the people on the small block side of the argument are like, what's the hurry? There's no hurry. Just and to me, like, there's the hurry to outrace the politicians, and then there's the other hurry. Life is short, right? I'm 42 now. More than half of my current expected life expectancy is already done, and it went in the blink of an eye. I've been involved in Bitcoin for more than 10 years now. Boof, it was over. So if I'm that 10 years went that fast, I'm 42. I'm gonna be 72 before I know it, and there's not a whole lot of years left after that. Hopefully we'll be able to change that, but that's a whole nother interview subject. But we want cryptocurrency to bring these benefits to the world as soon as we possibly can. And so, long story short there, the small block camp wasn't in a hurry, and they thought that having people be able to run full nodes on cheap computers with bad internet connections was more important or was a better strategy than having billions of people all over the world being able to use Bitcoin for all sorts of commerce, even if it makes it harder to run a full node on your home computer on a home internet connection. And I think the trade-off, and we are where we are today, but I think the trade-off would have been way better if we had driven more adoption, because at the end of 2017, we had companies like Microsoft that had been accepting Bitcoin. They stopped accepting Bitcoin. Dell Computer stopped accepting Bitcoin. Expedia.com stopped accepting Bitcoin. It was the first time in the entire history of Bitcoin in which we had reverse adoption. And if that adoption hadn't been reversed like that, everyone's excited, oh, Bitcoin's $50,000. Maybe it would have already been $500,000 today, because the Microsofts and the Dell Computers and the Expedias, they wouldn't have stopped accepting Bitcoin. They would have continued, and maybe Amazon would have already been accepting Bitcoin today, and people would be doing payroll, and you'd be able to buy your pet food and baby diapers and old people diapers all at the same time easily with Bitcoin right now today. And so, like any good economist, you have to look at not only what's seen, but what's not seen. And what we see is, okay, Elon Musk is busy tweeting about Bitcoin and Dogecoin, and the price is $50,000. That's great. But where would we have been today if Bitcoin had continued to have fast, cheap, reliable transactions, and all these businesses never stopped accepting Bitcoin? They just continued accepting it the whole way through. And we wouldn't have had a split in the community. The small blockers always said, oh, you can only do soft forks. You can never have a hard fork because it'll split the community. And that's why we have to do segregated witness as a soft fork and all this stuff. And they still seem blind to it to this very day. They said that they can only have soft forks because it'll split the chain otherwise. The chain split. This chain split into 3,000 different altcoins now, in addition to multiple different flavors of Bitcoin. So the very thing that they said they were trying to prevent, they caused by only sticking to soft forks, and they still seem blind to that to this very day for whatever reason, or they just don't want to admit it. I don't know which it is. So that's
Which one?
my summary of years of events, but in
What do you
just a
think it
couple of
is?
minutes.
Do you think it's blindness? Do you think it's not willing to admit it? Is it what role does Blockstream have in that?
So two questions there. So which is it? I think it depends on the person. Some people can see it and don't admit it. Other people are just blind to it. There's another friend of mine from Tokyo was arguing with somebody on the internet about this very subject, and he said it so clearly. He said, like, it's okay. Like it's hard to see the future. Most people, have cloudy foresight because you don't know what's going to happen in the future. But he told the guy, said, but you have cloudy hindsight. And I thought that was so true of what the situation was, because most people, you can see what happened in the past and know, but this guy, he definitely had cloudy hindsight. But the role Blockstream played in all this was very clear. So they raised over $100 million from traditional credit card companies and insurance companies and the traditional financial system. And their entire goal there was basically to make money on top of the Bitcoin platform by licensing side chains and then, Lightning Network and this other stuff. But the thing to keep in mind is that nobody needed any of their products if they didn't cripple Bitcoin itself. Bitcoin was working great. And if Bitcoin was working great, nobody would need any of the products that Blockstream had, to offer. And so they intentionally crippled Bitcoin's usability and then tried to sell their products to fix the problems that they caused. And so another thinker that I'm a big fan of is a man named Harry Brown. And he would talk about it. He said, it's like the government breaks your legs, gives you crutches, and then says, see, if it wasn't for the government giving you crutches, you wouldn't be able to walk. And it was kind of the exact same sort of thing with Blockstream. They intentionally crippled Bitcoin's usability as money. And then they started selling their sidechain liquid solution and other things and saying, see, if it wasn't for all these giant geniuses with their giant brains at Blockstream, you guys wouldn't be able to use Bitcoin at all. And it was really frustrating as somebody who watched it happen right before my eyes. Bitcoin went from being amazing for payments on the internet and e-commerce to not being usable at all. And that's why the community splintered into thousands of different altcoins. A lot of people also probably won't realize this. Vitalik Buterin, the creator of Ethereum, originally wanted to build all of Ethereum on top of Bitcoin. But he looked at the scaling debate and the block size argument that was happening on Bitcoin, and he saw that, oh, well, if they're not going to allow Bitcoin to scale for more people to use it, I guess I'll start my own chain and build Ethereum on something else. And then for people that played a part in all the different ICOs that went on, all of that would have happened on Bitcoin as well. And starting in maybe 2013, probably, there was another company called Counterparty, and you can Google Counterparty. They were doing tokens on top of Bitcoin. So today everybody knows Tether, for example, as an Ethereum token, and now it's on some other chains as well. Tether started out as a token on top of Bitcoin. In fact, you can still withdraw Tether as a token on top of Bitcoin from Bitfinex or a number of other places, and you can pay the high Bitcoin fees. But all of these tokens were starting to happen on top of Bitcoin. And the Counterparty guys were really doing a good job, and there were going to be all these amazing smart contracts and amazing things happening on top of Bitcoin with tokens. The Blockstream guys and the small block guys saw that that was happening, and they intentionally shortened the amount of data that could be included in the the op return of Bitcoin, which basically made it so that all these tokens and the stuff that was starting to happen on top of Bitcoin no longer was possible. So they intentionally crippled Bitcoin and reduced its ability to do things. And it was a disaster, right? So like all this amazing stuff would have happened on top of Bitcoin if they hadn't intentionally, time after time, again, with step after step, limited Bitcoin's ability to be useful to people to do these amazing amazing things with cryptocurrency. And now they're busy trying to license their liquid sidechain. And if you have an exchange, they'll gladly charge you a bunch of money and help you set up your liquid sidechain to deal with all the congestion and high fees on the Bitcoin network. Well, those are problems that they caused by their policy of limiting the block size on Bitcoin.